Good morning, everyone, and I just wanted to say thank you very much to our three presenters. It was very informative. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'd just like to add something onto the oil content discussion. I actually worked in fast food. I also worked for the airline industry, and this question is pertinent to the recycling of the oil from fast food restaurant chains. I'd just like to ask the ladies, have an indication, raise their hand, who knows what their lipstick's made from? For the information of people that live in Queensland, KFC's oil is recycled and 98% of it goes into lipsticks. That oil from the fryers, the fryers are cleaned once a week, and the average temperature range for cooking chips and nuggets is between 140 and 191 degrees every day, from 10 till 10. So by the time it gets recycled, that's the quality of your oil. So maybe, just consider what lipstick you use. Then, having been in the airline industry prior to that, apparently the average, consumption of lipstick by flight attendants is between 7 and 10 kilos a year. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everybody. John Beanie is my name. On the Medical Observer magazine, which is a free magazine delivered to GPs primarily, there was an advert just this Friday, for Weet-Bix fortified with phytosterols. So first question, why would they be advertising, Sanitarium this is, advertising Weet-Bix on the front page of a medical magazine? Well, because it works really well with statins to help lower cholesterol, which is true. Now, the question is there any use, can the body make any use of a vegetable sterol as against our natural cholesterol? And also bear in mind, Paleolithic man was reckoned to have eaten quite a bit more vegetable products than, vegetables formed quite a big part of the diet of Paleolithic man. So is there any case at all for phytosterols, or are they just unusable by the human body?
I don't think I have a full answer for that. I can say phytosterols are one of the reasons that the vegetarians promote their diet. They say because that's the only way you're going to get your phytosterols. But I don't know of any evidence that they are necessary and essential for human survival. And what Paleolithic man ate is quite debated, and so I think we can't say with any real confidence how much plant or animal foods Paleolithic man ate. I think there's a legitimate debate over a pretty big range of numbers there. I think phytosterols might just be a marketing concept on the side of the plant-based industries. That would be my best guess, but I haven't looked into it too much. Anybody else? Gary knows the answer.
This is Belinda Mark II. That Weet-Bix lowering cholesterol brand, the data related to that is unpublished. So they have done their own in-house study. They're not publishing it, yet they're advertising it. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Can I just add to the previous question? There's a very good paper written by Zoe Harcombe from Scotland specifically about
Wales.
Phytosterols, and it's very good.
Okay. Zoe Harcombe from Wales has written a published paper or a blog on phytosterols? blog. She's written a blog. Anybody who doesn't know Zoe Harcombe and is really interested in
I think it might be in the British Journal of Sports Medicine or something like that. But if you put in Harcombe plant sterols, you'll get the paper out of Google.
You can also might consider buying lipstick with it. That's another good option.
Hi, my name's Elle. I'll first have to pick my jaw up off the floor after Belinda's talk. That was incredible. But a couple of months ago, it came into my awareness that the FDA in the US had actually banned trans fats, yet in Australia, it's not. And we actually aren't by law governed to actually disclose. The food industry doesn't have to disclose if they use trans fats. So I was quite horrified and created a change.org petition, which I have out there right now, trying to get signatures to bring awareness to this. And I'm not sure what fairyland I was living in, because after hearing you, Nina, I was thinking, surely this would be passed and we'd go revert back to using stable fats. And now it's just horrifying to think that even if that was to become successful in this country, it's not going to be the result. It could be potentially more harmful oils coming in.
You know, I hate to say it, but I think you're possibly right. I think that, well, first of all, if you don't know if your food has any trans fats in it, it's usually it's called partially hydrogenated something oil. That means it has trans fats in it. But it is true that I think that the trans-free alternatives are very likely worse because they are unstable. And they have these kinds of oxidation products. And I personally, knowing all the literature that I know, would be happier eating partially hydrogenated vegetable oils than any of those trans-free oils. So I think until they lift the caps on saturated fats, which allows for the use of what will come in is probably palm oil, which is used, used industrially, but maybe even, animal fats. That those, I would wait for that strategically if I were you.
I might change the wording of my petition. Thank you.
My question's for Nina. I first say that I'm very humbled that people from other disciplines have had the courage and the strength and the wisdom to challenge established medical paradigms. And so you've done so well with the diet heart hypothesis and raising consciousness all over the world. And I know engineers and people in other disciplines have done the same. My question relates to the extension of the diet heart hypothesis. There seems to be a chain going, saturated fat consumption, heart disease, elevated LDL cholesterol, and therefore you must be on a statin medication. And being a low-carb doctor, I get asked a lot of second opinions where people have mildly elevated LDL cholesterol and the doctor wants to commit them for life to a statin medication. I've lost a lot of faith in LDL as a very blunt instrument, appropriate in some circumstances. So I just wonder whether you'd comment on that based on your research.
Yes, I mean, that's a big topic. There was an excellent talk on that yesterday, and Dave Feldman is going to be giving one right after this. I think the short answer is that the data that we have on saturated fats is on what's called hard endpoints, death, right? Heart attacks, but mainly death is the one you can't dispute. Since we have that data, we really, and because that data shows that saturated fats have no effect on death, there's no point in talking about any of these intermediary markers. It's literally like saying, okay, we know who won the race. Let's go back and look at your half times and make some decisions about where you were midway through the race, right? That's what LDL represents in this story. It's irrelevant since we have this, it's a very unusual body of data, which is data on tens of thousands of people looking at the end of the race, death. So that's the most important thing. The other thing to note is that LDL, although there's data from statin trials to show that statins lowering LDL may be protective for some people, there is no diet trial showing that lowering LDL through diet will will improve your outcomes. So it was just an assumption made that the LDL lowering with drugs would be the same if you lowered LDL through diet, but that was never shown to be true. And when they tested it, they couldn't show it to be true. So LDL for the diet story is really not relevant. It just hangs on because it's one of the ways that the defenders of the status quo can defend their hypothesis, really.
Hi, David Monk from Sunshine Coast. I've got a question for Nina. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for being part of my LCHF journey. I was born about 3 years after those 1961 AMA guidelines around polyunsaturated oils and went on to religiously follow the Australian Heart Foundation guidelines and had a heart attack at 47. So my question refers a bit more to yesterday's talk about the 4 points you had. So I'm curing myself, I'm talking to others, educating my GP. I just was wondering if you could give some broad strokes around being an advocate were your 4th point from yesterday, just generally.
I think there are many ways to be an advocate. I think that ultimately here in Australia, you will need some kind of group that will go after the guidelines in a sophisticated way in Sydney by really taking on that, really the evil Death Star itself. That has to change from top down. And in the meantime, whatever the bottom-up solutions are really vary from place to place. You can, and I don't know. Here in Australia, you should support Gary Fettke, for one. But you can, if you give me your email. I mean, I think that changing the U.S. dietary guidelines is going to be incredibly important. So, we have a petition. I would love everybody here to sign our petition and get your names on there. And then when time comes for everybody to call all the U.S. congressmen, I want them getting calls. I want them getting millions of phone calls. So you can do that. If you want to go to its www.nutrition-coalition.org, and there's a manifesto that I've written with Gary Taubes. We've sort of decided what we really think is science-based, and if you sign that and sign up your email address, and if we can ever call upon you, we will.
Thank you.
First, before I get to the question, for those who are interested, the cholesterol-lowering wheat Bix was a study was done at the University of South Australia. Obviously, the power stayed on for long enough. For a month, 46 people were given this wheat Bix with plant sterols. No, the data wasn't published where they're claiming the up to 9% reduction is based on previous work. It's really just extraordinary. But my question is probably more for Belinda. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is not a particularly big church, say, compared to the Catholic Church or others, and generally smaller churches are viewed more with suspicion. They generally don't manage to get a massive amount of influence. So I'm wondering if you found how they'd managed to exert this degree of influence from being a relatively small church.
I think their influence has come about because of education, and because they are driven by this purpose that medical evangelism is the right arm of the church. So they are set on research and proving these visions. And they are now the second biggest educator worldwide behind the Catholic Church. In Gary's talk, he gives all the stats and all the figures for all of that. So in 150 years, they're almost overtaking the Catholic Church in education. So because they have education, as I was showing up there, they set up research institutes, and the research institutes are in the hospitals or in the universities that they own, and then they get funding for that, and then they support that funding by their other entities and this entity and that. It just goes around and around. And one of the biggest things is that CHIP program, and it was started in America at Loma Linda by a guy called Hans Steele, and it's been bought by Sanitarium in conjunction with Avondale College, and that CHIP program is being used. It's being rolled out around Australia and America. Unfortunately for, I think, the Seventh-day Adventist and any church pretty much in Australia, we didn't have the backing. Because we're a penal colony, I don't think we got into religion as much as they had hoped we would. But they are a huge entity in their influence worldwide, and where they've taken their missionary work and everything else. They've got 2 universities in Papua New Guinea. So, this is a really big group, and this CHIP program in America, a lot of workplaces are using the CHIP program so then they can get insurance for their employees, and it's part of the package. And the CHIP program costs $500 per person per year. So they've got the food industry, and my issue is never with anyone with a belief and wanting to go walk into a church and what they want to do. I have no issue with that whatsoever. My issue is with the church having a conflict of interest with a temperance basis and talking about not eating addictive foods and not doing all those things, and then having a food industry that sells up and go, which is full of sugar and full of chemicals. It's like, I've said to a few people, it would be like the Catholic Church saying, we don't believe in, you're not allowed to use contraception, but by the way, we own a condom making factory down the road. It's that which I'm questioning, and that which I'm questioning is that key people within the church are in our dietary and diabetes guidelines. I haven't found them in the Heart Foundation, but in the diabetes guidelines. And while they are in our governments or in our regulatory body, dietary guidelines and diabetes guidelines, Gary will never be allowed to talk about saturated animal fats. That's my issue. Yeah, the medical evangelism is part of their core mission. So that's the hugest thing. And their research is to prove the visions of Ellen G. White. And as I say, Gary's got a couple of amazing stats in his talk from that, and where they set up these things. And so it's huge. That's small.
Thank you. Now, I want to thank all the speakers again, and I'm really glad, Nina, that you brought up the Mediterranean diet issue. I tell you why. At the levels with which I work and talk, so GPs at the higher levels, teachers, they use the word Mediterranean diet frequently. They quote the Leon Hart study and the Pyramid study, and they go, look, it kicks its own goals all the time, as if Mediterranean diet's the way to go. My problem is that nobody can define what it is. And the point is, if you ask a layperson what a Mediterranean diet looks like, it's gnocchi, pasta, And seriously, I just think that we have to be very careful, because this is going to sneak under our radar screen, and suddenly this is the next go-to for all of us. So I'd really like some comments on the Mediterranean diet.
Well, I devote a whole chapter of my book to the Mediterranean diet, which the whole concept of it was also invented by Ansel Keys, and it really was. He wrote a book called Living Well, the Mediterranean Way, and even in that book he acknowledged there really is no definition of the Mediterranean diet. The way they eat around the Mediterranean, all the countries, they eat differently in France than they do in Italy, than they do in Israel. So there really is there's never been a definition of the Mediterranean diet. It is now, and that the promotion of it into a kind of Mediterranean diet with a capital D, like a concept that a doctor will tell you, was something that was invented by the olive oil industry, the European olive oil industry seeking to increase sales in America, and then they held a series of the best ever conferences all over the Mediterranean and invited scientists and food writers and chefs, and that was, from that, the Mediterranean diet was born. And then there's a couple pretty dodgy studies that show, what do they show? Do they show anything for the Mediterranean diet? What they show, there's 2 of them. In both of them, they compared it to the failed low-fat diet. What they show is that if you increase your fat, maybe it's olive oil or maybe any kind of fat, you will show better health outcomes. So, it's very likely that a high butter Swedish diet compared to the low-fat diet would also look better. Or a diet in Mongolia would look better than the failed low-fat diet. But it's just that everybody wanted to go vacation in the Mediterranean, so that's why we have the Mediterranean diet and we don't have the Siberian diet.
Quick one for Marty. At the beginning of your talk, you talked about the future of your work into absorbability and anti-nutrients. So a double question. One is, are you looking at mercury in fish as a toxin? And a question for the three of you, is there a role for taking a multivitamin, multimineral?
Mercury in fish, it's hard to quantify, but fish generally, I think, does well from an overall micronutrient and protein profile. So as long as you're not eating swordfish and shark and those fish at the high end of the top end of the food chain, generally the consensus is you're doing well, although some people are more sensitive to mercury. A multivitamin, I suppose it's probably more likely to be insurance than, a primary source of vitamins should be from the diet, and you're probably going to get better absorbability from that. So, yeah.
I probably shouldn't answer that Seventh-day Adventists don't really like medication and they push supplements.
Yeah, I guess my only contribution is that, when they've done clinical trials looking at multivitamins, they've never been able to show any benefit. So it's a waste of money.
It's a big pharmaceutical big food supplement.
Hello, thank you all for your very interesting presentations, and I have to say that some of the information scares the hell out of me. I've got a question for Nina. I'm a member of a number of forums to do with low carb, high fat, and some of the people that are in these forums are Americans, and they mention quite frequently that through their workplaces they have to undergo medicals to gain some sort of insurance, and they worry a lot about their cholesterol level and things like that because that denies them this insurance. I'm just wondering, with the adherence to the health guidelines, what you think about perhaps, them taking it further as far as testing people's health in workplaces, and whether that's, going to be some way of sort of imposing it further on people.
Yeah, this is a huge and terrible topic, a very disturbing topic, which is that workplaces now tie compensation to your wellness, your effort that you make in wellness, and they have wellness programs, including this CHIP program, where they pay and you are forced to participate. And then if you don't meet whatever goals they have, which are traditional goals, such as total cholesterol, LDL, then you are penalized in some way, or maybe you don't lose enough weight. And of course, all those programs are based on the low-fat diet, so many people are guaranteed to fail. It's a horrible situation. It's a complete scam. And the only thing I can suggest, I know two things to suggest. I don't know how to fix it, but there's a guy named Al Lewis who's written a book about all of this. And the other thing that, if you can do it, you can suggest to people to try to get their company to sign up with a provider named Virta, VIRTA. They are trying to enter this wellness space using mobile-based tools, and they promote a ketogenic diet for diabetics. So, and they are trying to partner with companies. So I think that, maybe it's just for diabetics, I don't know, but, I think that whole industry really has to change. I think it will once you see the better outcomes. Companies, once they realize they can truly save money on people who are actually getting well, will help shift, be part of the change, but it's just not happening yet.
I'll just add one thing to that. And I guess as we're moving forward, more and more people are learning how to hack. And so if you speak to Dave Feldman, he knows how to hack your cholesterol results and getting people to do it for insurance. And our daughter, she had to have the gestational diabetes. It's law that everyone has to have the test, huge glucose load to see if you've got gestational diabetes. in our centre when we were owning it, which we don't own anymore, so we have no conflict of interest, we were seeing a lot of people come in, and because they'd been low carbing, when they had that high glucose load, they were getting a false positive. And so we're having people come in that we didn't believe had gestational diabetes, and then they have 1 week to get their blood glucose under control before they have to be put on insulin as a young pregnant mum who's so scared about anything. So we told our daughter when she was pregnant and had to have her test to carb load for a week before, so her results were perfect, and then go back to low carb. So there's ways of hacking for insurances.
Great. Perhaps one more question before morning tea. Yep.
All right, thanks. I'll make this quick. My name's Leanne Scott. I'm with the Nutritional Therapy Association. I first wanted to thank you very much, Nina, because your book is our required reading textbook for our students. So thank you very much. And I have a quick question for Marty. As you know, Marty, we're big fans of nutrient density. And I wanted to know what your thoughts, what your observations have been around zero carb and the nutrient density of that, and maybe around organ meats and as well the microbiome. What are your opinions on can we maximize nutrient density on a zero carb diet? I know we've got these big proponents like Amber O'Hearn saying that we can benefit from just organ meats to get all the nutrients we need. What do you think? What are you seeing?
Fantastic question and controversial, and I suppose my system focuses on the recommended daily intake, but I've actually had a lot of interesting interactions with Sean Baker and Amber and a bunch of people online arguing those points. And when I've dug into it, some of those micronutrients like potassium, magnesium, calcium, the big ones that we focus on, they're based on legitimate deficiency testing in real people. And if you don't get enough of those, you're in trouble. Maybe those recommended daily intakes might vary, depending on who you are, your activity levels, what you're eating, but they're a big deal. Some of the other ones like vitamin E, manganese, and a handful of others tend to be based on, we don't really know what you'll get a deficiency from if you don't eat enough of those. So we'll just look at a normal healthy population and take that average. So it's typically those more obscure ones that don't have hard recommendations for that tend to be the ones that the zero carbers aren't getting enough of. And the other angle on that is maybe people like the Maasai are eating, they're drinking blood, they're drinking milk, and they're eating a lot of meat and doing fantastically. They look like some of the healthiest people in the world. Maybe some of the potassium, magnesium's coming from the blood, so those people doing a raw meat, more raw zero carb diet are thriving because they're actually getting the potassium and magnesium from those uncooked foods, and there's a massive amount in organ meats, although Dr. David pointed out that vitamin A is probably the only nutrient you can overblow through overeating liver, but I don't see a lot of people doing that. A lot of people are eating muscle meat and seem to be thriving, so more credit to them. I'd probably advise getting a broad range from zero carb, and if it works for you. A lot of people have massive gut intestinal issues and they go from eating a really processed carbohydrate diet to zero carb, and because they take out all those inflammatory things from their diet, they instantly thrive. Whether over time they might benefit more to get more nutrients and more fibre to gradually to bring real food back into the diet, you're the expert as well. And the verdict's still out, but yeah, definitely an interesting topic, and online it's a thriving issue, and yeah, it's a good question. Thank you.
We're out of time. Great if we can get all the speakers, that's from yesterday, today and this afternoon, up here. We'll have half an hour break and we'll be back.